house down the road. But he said, I just hope he doesn't bring a guitar because he's such a terrible singer. That's what he uses. So Leonard turned up, I met Leonard. So then we became friends, and as things developed, I got to know more about how people lived on the island. Leonard, for instance, they all had a credit line with the Nicholas Katiska, who ran a little supermarket and a cafe. If you ever go to Hydra, the Katiska brothers are still there. And he would get a year's credit. So any artist who turned up in the island, free food for a year, free water, because the water had to be taken from Athens. They have no piped water on Hydra, it's all brought in by boat. So they were all hanging out in Katiska, and another place called Bill's Bar. Bill Cunliffe had a bar there, and they were all in the bar. So we were hanging out there with Cohen and Bill's Bar and Katiska's, and we were all on credit. Of course, Kenneth Hennessy didn't have to worry about credit because he was a very wealthy man, and I didn't have to worry about my wonderful three-course dinners every evening because Hennessy had it served up by some servant who came in every evening, and we had the best of food. So we lived like that. So in the meantime, I did discover that there was a lot of other impoverished artists. I mean, there were some wealthy ones like Hennessy. There was another guy called Bryce Martin who made millions from, he just died recently, he was a postmodernist painter. He had a villa on the island. And then I got to know a very close friend of Hennessy's, and his name was Anthony Kingsmill Long. And Anthony was a bit of a character. He survived on selling the odd painting, going gambling on the island, trying to win money over cards. And I was hanging out with Anthony and that circle with Leonard. And what happened then was that obviously, I met a lot of the other circle on the island. But a few years later, I was in Shakespeare and Company in Paris. George Whitman ran Shakespeare. I don't know if you probably know this bookshop. It was where Joyce published Ulysses. I dressed up in a kind of 17th century costume because there was some celebration on for the French Revolution, so I decided to go to Paris. In those days, I was very much into getting still partying, so I had this 17th century costume. I'm there about 2 a.m, and I hear this almighty noise with somebody lying on the couch in the library. And I go inside, turn on the lights, and who's lying there? Only Anthony Kingsmill. I said, Anthony, what are you doing here? Oh, I've left my wife. I've tried to commit suicide and leave. He was very depressed. So I said, listen, Anthony, they're going to throw me out of the bookshop because they just think I'm a homeless. Because at that stage, Anthony was approaching, he must be 65, heading for some. So they just thought he was a homeless guy. I said, well, come back. I've got an apartment in London, I'll get you a flight. So we flew back to London, and he stayed with me for 6 months because when I met him, he was rather emaciated. So he would cook up eggs every day and food, and he was eating, and he just got fatter and fatter. And he got, he put on back his weight. I then went and organised his British pension because he hadn't been in England in 50 years. And he was also a member of the Colony Club. And then his daughter turned up, Emily, who's actually lives in America now, Emily Kingsmill Long. So he basically got back into English society. Anyway, just to go back, the parents of Leonard Cohen are actually, on his mother's side, he's from Kaunas, Lithuania. In fact, if you study Jewish history, especially in Ireland, most of the Jews in Ireland are from Lithuania. That's one of the reasons why there was a large movement of Jews in the 19th century, was that during the pogroms, which was about 1881 to 1917, 2 million Jews lived in the Ukraine. It was actually the region of the Ukraine. A lot of people don't realize that, but the Ukraine was had about 2 million Jews. There was another 3 million in eastern Ukraine. But Baron de Hirsch, who was a relative of Lady Desert, he had a bank called the Bischofheim Bank, and they put 300 million in 1898 into the rescue of the Polish, Ukrainian and Russian Jews, because there was very large amounts of anti-Semitism developing in Eastern Europe. So all those Jews were moved by ships through Latvia, Germany, into Canada, America, and all the Jews, like for instance in South Africa, are Lithuanian Jews. A lot of them came from Lithuania actually, and Poland. So to move on then from that, Cohn is a Lithuanian Jew on his mother's side. On his father's side, he's Polish, Jewish, his father. His father was a tailor who made suits. That's why even when the hippie movement came in the 60s, he never really wore hippie clothes. He always wore a suit because he was brought up like that. His grandfather was a rabbi. He had rabbis in all sorts of the family, and he was told that he was a Messiah and that he was descended from some Talmudic scholar. So he was brought up in this kind of tradition of the Jewish chanting and Jewish philosophy, Jewish religion. And that's very much, if you listen to Cohen's music, which you'll hear in a minute, songs of mercy, hallelujah, there's always this biblical, philosophical element. And that's the wonderful thing about Cohen, because, today we listen to a lot of music, but a lot of it doesn't have the depth. Cohen would spend a long period of time working on a poem. He could spend weeks on a poem, and that's why it's very much layered with all sorts of philosophical and religious meanings. And tonight we put together about 40 clips. It's the first time it's been done to show you the range of Cohen's work, how he started off in Hydra. And just one final little story I want to tell you is that he spent 7 years about on the island, living on $12 a month. Of course, the Katiskas were giving him food and stuff, and he wrote about 16 books of poetry, but he only sold about 400 a year. He got back to Canada, and he thought he was a bestseller if you sold 400 a year. And but he wasn't doing very well. He was struggling. He wrote 2 novels. One was about an American Canadian Indian called St. Catherine Tiwahika, who became a Christian. He was very much influenced by her because he was originally from the area of Montreal, which is French Quebec. But anyway, after 7 years, you had a military takeover of Greece. The generals took over Greece, so he went to live in the Chelsea Hotel in New York, and that's where you have the song "I Remember You Well" in the Chelsea Hotel, because that's where he met Janis Joplin. But the one final point I want to make is that it was Suzanne, the song about this Canadian Indian, and Suzanne Verdal. She was a dancer he knew that he used to go and have tea with. He was we're kind of in love with each other, but didn't really have a relationship. But he wrote this song about Suzanne, and he was in New York, and I can't remember the name of the lady now, but you'll see her in a minute. It was recorded for radio, and he always said he couldn't sing, and he was too nervous to go on stage. But he was invited to an anti-nuclear event with Jimi Hendrix with 20,000 people, and he said to his lawyer, you'll see this in a minute, he said, well, I can't do this. Why is that? Because I can't sing. And his lawyer said, none of you can sing. Bob Dylan can't sing. It's about the message. Forget the singing. If I want to sing it, I go to an opera house. So basically, he went out on stage, he had stage fright and left the stage in front of 20,000 people. And he had to be hauled back out and finish Suzanne. Then his agent stole the royalties. He never got a penny for the song. He signed it's all in the documentary. And then his Suzanne never got a penny. She ended up homeless in Los Angeles. So it's a kind of story. I always find it amusing when people talk about Cohn, who sold millions of records. When I knew them, they were all struggling artists. Well, Hennessy wasn't struggling, but the others were struggling. And people talk about, what I find fascinating is that some journeys of some artists, some become internationally famous, some become wealthy. I know artists that are still struggling, and I always try to encourage them. I have had some level of success because I have the academic discipline, luckily enough, and I'm a non-drinker. But I just had a friend of mine who fell in the river recently and died. He was painting a picture and he was drowned, and he was an artist. So I just make it a point that if you are interested in the creative arts, you have to have a kind of vision, and hanging around with people like Cohn and Hennessy, these guys are not part-timers. They really do go all the way. They're a bit like Charles Bukowski, the American writer. They really lay their life on the line. It's almost like a religion. And in a way, for a lot of people, art is a kind of religion. And I know one very mentally handicapped chap who I meet for tea on occasions, and all he does is paint little houses. But I know those houses saves him. I know that he gets up every morning and he shows me a picture of a little house. I know it saves him, because to have an intellectual or a spiritual or a philosophical interest in life can save you. Obviously you can have relationships, you can get married, you can have a girlfriend, you can have friendships, but the beauty of art, whether it's a book, I'm always fascinated by bookshops. You can open up a book and there's a whole world in there. And that's what I think Cohn was about, and Hennessy and that scene. They really did do their homework over the years. They really tried, and eventually Hennessy and Cohn broke through and became world famous because there was something beautiful, emotional, spiritual, and philosophical. And when you watch this documentary, I assure you there won't be a pin dropping in the room, because I've tried to assemble the intense beauty of Cohn's work. And this is the first time that there's other documentaries, but nobody's really put it together and collated it for 1 hour. I could have gone on for 2 hours. My good friend, editor, Conor Dully, who actually edited it over the last month, and we put the whole thing together. And I really I think you will enjoy this experience of watching this movie. There's more, obviously, in the book. There's more depth and intellectual material. It's the only book written about Leonard Cohen and his relationship with Marianne. During COVID, I sat down for about 6 months and wrote the book. I had nothing else to do because your government had told me I couldn't go out. But the first thing I did, as they lifted it, they lifted it for about a week, I took a train to the Ukraine, and I got over the border into Odessa, into Kiev, and there was nobody wearing masks. And I spent a few months in the Ukraine. And then I came back, I typed up the book. The book has struggled, but recently my agent in France has got a publisher in Paris, and it's going to be in 6,000 bookshops in France. I did not get an Irish publisher. I have a little small publishing house that I got it out here. The film, we raised $250,000 from a studio in Pinewood Studios, get the producers $250,000, and what happened was that the second script I sent to Norway, somebody was at a meeting where they made an $18 million version of my script with the same title, So Long Marianne. And the producers admitted recently at a meeting that it was based on my script. So that's where it goes. It started off with one page, hanging out with Hennessy, and this is just a culmination. It's a very interesting story, but this is a story that I've been involved with for over 30 years. So I thank you all for coming. One final point I will make, literacy levels in Ireland have dropped. 25% of people are stopped reading books in Ireland in the last 5 years. So you have to be congratulated on having a literary interest, whether it's in a book or in a film, to come out here tonight, because I assure you 700,000 people in Ireland, according to OECD, which is regulations where they check it out, do not read books in Ireland anymore. They're reading mobile telephones. Anyway, thank you for this, and even I'm going to enjoy watching this. Thank you.